Well, Trywell Kwakwamba looks out at the hard, dry land he has painstakingly tilled and planted in this film adaptation of his son William Kwakwamba's powerful memoir, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. So thirsty for the rainy season is the land, but it's also too brittle to support too much water. The man on the radio says neighboring Mozambique is flooding. When Trywell's nephew on the neighboring property decides to sell all his trees, the flood protection for Trywell's fields, he knows it's not going to be a good crop year. And it isn't. The rains come and they wash out the fields. Can you stop it, please? Thank you. The rains come and they wash out the fields. Despite thrashing about out in the rain trying to protect his crops, when the harvest arrives, the plants are weak and they produce hardly anything. Certainly not enough to support his family until the next year's crops. The whole area in Malawi is experiencing famine. Fears and anxieties run high. Now, Trywell and his wife, they made the decision years before that they were going to send their kids to school, even their daughter. But now their neighbors are clucking at them, reminding them how foolish it was to invest in education instead of saving literally for a rainy day. Quickly, food grows scarce. The tribe is unsuccessful getting government support. In fact, when the tribe's chief goes to the government, they beat him up. Trywell and his wife Agnes start to worry about how they're going to feed their family. And they decide to spend what little savings they have on some grain, a small food supply that will get them by in the meantime. But when Trywell leaves with a group of men to go try to petition at the Capitol and tell them about the plight of their people, what little grain they had purchased and what little they had harvested is stolen out of their storeroom. The situation for this family is growing more and more desperate by the minute. In a very heartbreaking scene, the family sits in a circle, deciding which one meal they're going to eat each day as they try to ration their food through the year. Trywell, the father of the family, quite literally starts to starve himself so that his children will have enough to eat. And each day of the dry season, his starved, energyless muscles throw a hoe into the hard, dry ground, hoping against hope, against reason, that somehow, someway, they might be able to produce a second harvest during the dry season, even though there's not a hint of rain in the forecast. It's a losing battle. No matter what he tries, he can't make enough for his family. He can't grow enough. His teenage son, William, with a brilliant mind for mechanics and for fixing things, has to drop out of school, to the boy's great disappointment. The family doesn't have enough to feed themselves, let alone pay tuition. But William, this young boy, he has an idea his father could never even imagine. If he could just figure out a way of harnessing some sort of energy, some sort of electricity, he could get their water pump working, and they could successfully harvest during the dry season. Though his father has told him he wants him out in the fields working with him, William sneaks into his old science class. And he blackmails his science teacher because he knows that he's his sister's secret boyfriend. And the teacher gives him access to the library. There he researches and researches, and he comes upon this idea of wind energy. With some friends, he builds a small prototype of a windmill, and he attaches a radio to it. When the wind starts to blow, the radio blares to life, and his friends applaud him. He knows he can do it. He can do the impossible. Make it rain. Make a second life-giving harvest possible. But there's one thing that stands in the way. He's gone out to the junkyard and he's found every part he needs for this wind turbine he wants to build. Except one thing. He needs a good solid wheel mechanism. And he knows just where he can find one. His father's bike, the family's only transportation. Let's watch the scene where he goes to ask his father for his bike.
Ababa, ndikufuna muone china chake. Baba, mwamba.
Mjani.
Ndi mageti ya mpepo. Mafaniwa ama panga mageti. Opanga video.
Chabuna.
Kama ichindi cha chingono. Ndikufuna ndipange chigali cha mpepo cha chikulu mpaka kupopa madzi muntaka. Ndiyo kuti ngakale pali lichilala tita kudzala bembewu. Nditu koma kuti tipange chigayo cha chikulu ndikufuna fani ya makono ya ikulu. Mutandibwereka njinga yanu dzita kuteka.
Njinga yanu?
Choncho basi zidateka.
Kangati pamane?
Ndikufuna kugulitsa ntchito matayala ndi fulemu, basi njingayo idzatera pompo.
Chani. William. Mwana zimene zikuchitika?
Inde abambo.
Anthu akufa kudziwa zimenezo?
Izidziwa tandiza anthu onse.
Usapanga nane za masewero, ha?
Abambo.
Ineza! Usupite aichoka!
Ababa, ndikufuna njingayo kuti tipange mageti. Ndi mageti tita kupanga mati, tita kupanga mvula.
Uko yango labi.
Bali zintazina zimene ndi madziwa zimu madziwa.
Chifukwa ungate kupanga zoselowese.
Chifukwa cha sukulu.
Baba! Wajizuka mawandi yene. Baba! Kuzindi kandizi, tindinwezi. Tasakulu, iwalani. Samulai balali, zata. Musiye, na mafulishi hizi. Dila la kuitsa. Dila la kuitsa, basi pakali pano. Uziwe, za ulimi, demiti. Tialima hapo. Tialima hapo.
The fears and the anxieties in us can sometimes take up so much space that it's hard to dream. It's hard to take risks. It's hard to care for each other. Perhaps that's what happened to the Pharisees, these religious leaders living as they were in occupied territory. We like to give the Pharisees a hard time, but they were trying to survive and keep their people alive, just like everyone else. And like most of the people around them, they were no doubt scared of their Roman occupiers. You might recall that toward the beginning of Jesus' life, there had been a slaughter of all the Jews who tried to rebel against Rome and these puppet kings that Rome kept trying to install over them. So the Pharisees were painfully aware of the cost of stepping even one toe out of line with Rome, which perhaps is why they were trying to stay so narrowly within their own lane, focusing on spiritual purity rather than social change. It's the one thing they could control. And don't we all know how we sense some need to have control over things when our world feels like it's just spinning out from underneath us. I'm not sure why they warned Jesus about King Herod's plot to kill him. Perhaps they're genuinely concerned for him. Or perhaps, though they won't admit it, they actually really admire his ministry and they wish they were doing the same thing if they weren't lugging around this ball and chain of their fears everywhere with them. Or maybe this is a scare tactic. Maybe they're worried about the kind of unrest that Jesus is stirring up and that they're going to get caught in the crosshairs between Herod and Jesus, between Rome and Jesus, that their people will be slaughtered once again. Maybe they feel the weight of responsibility to protect their people. Maybe they're just trying to get Jesus to take it easy. Stop ruffling so many feathers. Will you please just simmer down a little bit? Maybe they're trying to scare him into submission so they can keep the peace, which isn't really peace, but the Pax Romana, this false facade of peace, where there are still so many who are oppressed and suffering. Scare tactics are about as old as human beings, and usually they emerge out of fear. It's the parent who tries to scare their child out of being gay because they're deathly afraid for their child and what they'll potentially face in the world. It's the party leader who calls the candidate and warns that the big donors are going to pull out and you'll never win the election if you keep taking that position that you're so passionate about and actually try to affect change. Or, God forbid, refuse to run a negative smear campaign against your opponent. Or sometimes it's the voice of the fears in our own heads that threaten us, whispering, "You'll never succeed. Don't bother trying. Take that risk and you'll fail. Love and you'll get hurt." You see, we're very familiar with scare tactics. Jesus calls King Herod Antipas a fox, a predator, presumably the way farmers would talk about a fox in the hen house. Now, my grandparents owned a ranch when I was little, and for a few months when I was a kid, we went to live in their guest house while we were between houses. One of our jobs in the morning was going to collect the eggs. But one morning we didn't go to the hen house. I still remember the hushed whispers of the grown-ups at breakfast that morning as they tried to tell one another about the scene they had found early that morning without letting us kids overhear. You see, a coyote had got into the hen house. The carnage was horrific. Not a single hen left alive. From then on, whenever I heard anything outside at night, I'd hear the big door of the big house slam open and close, and my grandfather very purposely marched down that gravel path to the hen house, rifle in hand, ready to scare, or I suppose probably kill, whatever was threatening his chickens. I've been thinking this week a lot about the foxes in our own world. There are the obvious ones, of course, the corrupt or self-interested leaders and power brokers. But there are also the foxes that run around inside of us. Insecurities, rage, shame, fear, hate, all those things that threaten to destroy us or someone near us. And then there are also the ones that are built into the very fabric of our society, like racism or sexism, or as we are so painfully aware this week, as our hearts break for those in the community of Christchurch, New Zealand, Islamophobia and white supremacy. These things that threaten to tear us apart and quite literally take lives. You know, in our world, even in our own minds, predatory threats come at us from all different directions. And here are the Pharisees, this group of religious leaders coming to Jesus, fellow chickens of this flock under King Herod's occupying rule. And they're telling Jesus, don't balk too loud so that fox Herod doesn't notice us. This week, a clergy friend of mine sent me this news article. Check out the headline. Chickens gang up to kill fox. You see, it turns out that foxes don't always get the last word. You can go to the next one. As I mentioned, when famine hits Malawi, the Kakwamba family's tribal chief petitions the government for help. They beat him up. When Trywell leaves with a group of men to go make their case before the government and tell them about the plight of their people, robbers come and steal his family's food, and they could easily have raped or murdered his wife and daughter. Hope is wearing thin for this family that the foxes of their world, the threats, can be overcome, that they will have enough to eat, that they can survive. Despite his father's clear opposition and fear, despite being expelled from his school for sneaking into this class and into the library to do his research on the windmill, William, this one young man, won't be deterred. He continues relentlessly to hound his father about giving him that bike, until finally Trywell gives in. Together they construct the windmill. Thanks to William's persistent courage, they do the impossible. They make it rain. A second harvest comes. There is enough. You know, we follow the way of one who refused to be turned aside by fear from loving and healing and bringing hope to his people. He embodied the persistence and the love of our God, who will not be turned aside, and who shows us that even for us human beings, it is possible to escape those cycles of violence, those scare tactics, and lean into that counterintuitive power of love and of hope. Thanks be to God. Amen. Amen. Will you please stand and join in singing?